Electrolysis. Electrolysis is a process whereby a compound is decomposed into its constituent elements when an electric current passes through an electrolyte. Today we will talk about the effect of the type of electrodes on the product of electrolysis. The apparatus needed are an electrolytic cell, test tubes, ammeter, copper 2 sulfate solution, crocodile clips, and an electric source. We will start with the carbon electrodes. The two carbon electrodes are first cleaned with sandpaper. The electrolytic cell is then filled with 0.1 mol per dm cube of copper 2 sulfate solution. Two of the test tubes are also filled with copper 2 sulfate solution. The test tubes are then placed invertly over the two electrodes in order to collect the gases released. Do make sure no air bubbles are trapped in the test tubes. Then connect the electrolytic cell to the electric source using the crocodile clips. The switch is turned on. This is the overall setup of the apparatus. The aqueous solution of copper 2 sulfate consists of copper 2 ions, sulfate ions, hydrogen ions, and hydroxide ions that move freely. The sulfate ions and hydroxide ions move to the anode. The hydroxide ions is lower than the sulfate ions in the electrochemical series. Hence, the hydroxide ions are selectively discharged to form oxygen and water. During the electrolysis using carbon electrodes, the copper 2 ions and hydrogen ions move to the cathode. The copper 2 ion is lower than the hydrogen ion in the electrochemical series. Hence, the copper 2 ions are selectively discharged to form copper metal. The intensity of the blue color of the electrolyte decreases because the concentration of the blue copper 2 ions decreases when more copper is deposited on the cathode. These are the observations made. The steps above are repeated using copper electrodes to replace the carbon electrodes. During the electrolysis using copper electrodes, the copper 2 ions and hydrogen ions move to the cathode. The copper 2 ion is lower than the hydrogen ion in the electrochemical series. Hence, the copper 2 ions are selectively discharged to form copper metal. The sulfate ions and hydroxide ions move to the anode. However, these ions are not discharged. Instead, the copper electrode dissolves to form copper 2 ions. The intensity of the blue color of the electrolyte remains unchanged. This is because the concentration of the blue copper 2 ions remain unchanged. For one copper 2 ion discharged to form a copper atom at the cathode, one copper atom from the anode will dissolve to form a copper 2 ion. These are the observations made. During the electrolysis of copper 2 sulfate solution, oxygen and water are formed at the anode when carbon electrodes are used, while the copper anode dissolves to form copper 2 ions when copper electrodes are used. However, the product formed at the cathodes is not affected by the type of electrodes used.